The moment you realize what you lost is often the moment it is too late to get it back. The ballroom of the Lawson Grand Hotel sparkled beneath layers of crystal chandeliers, their golden reflections dancing across polished marble floors and towering glass walls overlooking Chicago's skyline. Tonight was supposed to be perfect. Richard Lawson stood at the center of it all, surrounded by investors, executives, politicians, and business leaders who had gathered to celebrate the most successful year in his company's history. Laughter echoed through the room. Champagne glasses clinked together. Cameras flashed as reporters documented every moment of the evening. Everything Richard had worked for seemed to be standing right in front of him. Wealth, influence, recognition, success. As guests congratulated him, he smiled politely and accepted every compliment. Yet beneath the polished exterior, there was an emptiness he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. Over the past 3 years, he had learned how to ignore it. Work became the answer to every uncomfortable question. The next project, the next acquisition, the next achievement. If he stayed busy enough, he never had to think about the marriage that had ended or the woman who quietly walked away from his life. Across the ballroom, a live orchestra began performing a familiar melody. Waiters moved gracefully between tables while giant screens displayed highlights from the company's record-breaking year. The event was everything Richard had envisioned. Then the doors opened. At first, almost nobody noticed. One guest turned toward the entrance. Then another. Conversations gradually slowed. A ripple of curiosity moved through the crowd. Within seconds, dozens of heads turned in the same direction. The atmosphere changed so suddenly that even Richard noticed. He paused in the middle of a conversation and followed everyone's gaze. The moment he saw her, the world seemed to stop moving. Monica Bennett stood near the entrance wearing an elegant silver evening gown that reflected the soft golden lights above. Her natural beauty was undeniable, but that was not what captured the room's attention. It was the confidence she carried, the calm dignity in her posture, the quiet certainty in her smile. She did not enter the ballroom seeking attention, yet attention followed her instantly. Richard could not move. For a moment, he wondered if he was imagining it. 3 years had passed since their divorce. 3 years since the final conversation that ended a chapter neither of them had expected to close. 3 years since he watched her leave with nothing except her pride and determination. The woman standing before him now looked familiar and completely different at the same time. Guests whispered among themselves. Some recognized Monica immediately. Others knew her only by reputation. Over the past few years, her name had become increasingly respected in business and philanthropic circles. She had built something remarkable for herself, something nobody expected, including Richard. Monica greeted several guests warmly before continuing deeper into the ballroom. She moved through the crowd with effortless grace. People approached her. Executives introduced themselves. Investors requested conversations. Everywhere she went, admiration seemed to follow. Richard watched every step. A strange feeling settled in his chest. It was not jealousy. It was something heavier, something far more difficult to ignore. For the first time in years, he was seeing clearly what everyone else in the room already saw. And as Monica smiled politely while accepting congratulations from strangers who respected her accomplishments, Richard realized that the greatest success story in the ballroom was not his own. It belonged to the woman he once believed would never thrive without him. 3 years earlier, before the applause, before the awards, before the success that now surrounded Richard Lawson, there had been a different version of his life. Back then, when reporters asked him about the secret behind his rapid rise in the real estate industry, he often spoke about discipline, ambition, and hard work. What he rarely mentioned was Monica Bennett. Yet she was woven into nearly every success story he proudly claimed as his own. Their marriage began long before luxury hotels, private jets, and magazine covers entered the picture. Richard was ambitious even then, but his company was still young and unstable. Some months were promising. Others were frightening. There were evenings when he returned home discouraged after losing investors or watching major deals collapse. During those moments, Monica became his safe place. She listened without judgment. She encouraged him when confidence disappeared. She reminded him that temporary setbacks did not define permanent outcomes. While Richard focused on building a business, Monica quietly carried responsibilities that rarely received recognition. She managed their home, supported his schedule, attended networking events, remembered important dates, smiled through difficult seasons. Whenever someone praised Richard's determination, Monica celebrated beside him. She never asked for credit. She believed they were building a future together. In those early years, they were genuinely happy. Weekends were simple. Dinner conversations lasted for hours. They laughed easily. They dreamed about what life might become once the company succeeded. Richard often promised that when things finally settled down, they would travel more, spend more time together, and enjoy everything they had sacrificed to build. Monica believed him. The problem was that success eventually arrived. And success changed everything. As Lawson Development expanded, Richard's schedule became increasingly demanding. Meetings filled every available hour. Investors expected constant availability. New opportunities appeared daily. At first, Monica understood. Growth required commitment. She encouraged him to pursue his goals. But gradually, work stopped being something Richard did. It became who he was. Family dinners became postponed meetings. Weekend plans became business trips. Important conversations became rushed exchanges between phone calls. Monica noticed the changes long before Richard did. She told herself the situation was temporary. Once the next project finished, things would improve. Once the next expansion was complete, life would return to normal. Yet every achievement seemed to create another obligation, another deadline, another excuse. One evening, Monica spent hours preparing a small anniversary dinner at home. Candles illuminated the dining room. His favorite meal waited on the table. She even wore the dress she knew he always admired. The clock moved slowly past 7 o'clock, then 8, then 9. Finally, a brief text message arrived. Emergency meeting. Do not wait up. Monica stared at the screen for a long time. The food grew cold. The candles burned low. The disappointment settled deeper than she wanted to admit. It was not really about one missed dinner. It was about becoming invisible inside her own marriage. Similar moments followed. Holidays interrupted by work. Conversations cut short. Promises delayed. Richard never intended to hurt her. That was what made the situation so complicated. He genuinely believed he was working for their future. Yet in the process, he stopped noticing the person standing beside him in the present. Monica never demanded luxury. She never competed with his career. She only wanted partnership, attention, presence, the things that cannot be replaced by success. As months turned into years, the distance between them became impossible to ignore. They still lived in the same house. They still attended events together. To outsiders, everything appeared perfect. But behind closed doors, silence slowly replaced connection. Looking back later, Richard would struggle to identify the exact moment everything began falling apart. Because the truth was painful. There was no dramatic argument. No single mistake. Only countless small moments when he chose everything else before the woman who had once been the center of his world. And while he remained busy celebrating his growing success, Monica quietly began learning how to live without him. The distance between Monica and Richard did not appear overnight. It arrived quietly, disguised as busy schedules, postponed conversations, and promises that always seemed reasonable in the moment. By the time either of them fully understood what was happening, the gap had become much wider than either imagined. Richard's success continued accelerating at an astonishing pace. New developments broke ground across multiple states. Business magazines featured his achievements. Industry leaders sought his advice. Every victory brought greater visibility and influence. To the outside world, he appeared to be living the dream he had worked toward for years. Inside his home, however, a different reality existed. Monica often sat alone at the dining table while Richard answered emails from across the room. Weekend mornings that once belonged to them became opportunities for conference calls and strategy meetings. Even when they occupied the same space, they seemed to live in separate worlds. Monica tried repeatedly to bridge the growing distance. She suggested short vacations, weekend escapes, simple dinners without phones or business discussions. Richard always agreed in principle. He genuinely meant every promise he made. The problem was that another project always appeared. Another investor needed attention. Another deadline demanded immediate focus. Monica began noticing something painful. Richard no longer asked about her dreams. In the early years of their marriage, he wanted to know everything. Her goals, her interests, her ideas. They spent hours discussing possibilities for the future. Now conversations revolved almost entirely around his company, his challenges, his ambitions, his plans. Monica listened because she loved him, yet a part of her quietly wondered whether he still saw her as a partner or simply as someone who would always be waiting when he finally had time. One evening, they attended an upscale charity event hosted by several prominent business leaders. The ballroom was elegant. Music drifted through the air. Guests mingled beneath sparkling lights. Throughout the evening, Richard moved from one conversation to another, introducing Monica briefly before directing his attention elsewhere. She spent much of the night standing alone while watching him charm investors and executives. At one point, an older woman approached her with a kind smile. "You must be proud," the woman said. Monica nodded politely. "I am." The woman glanced toward Richard across the room. "And what do you do?" The question caught Monica off guard. For a moment, she struggled to answer. Not because she lacked accomplishments, because she had spent so much time supporting Richard's journey that she had gradually stopped investing in her own. The realization followed her home that night. Over the following months, Monica began rediscovering pieces of herself that had been neglected. She enrolled in leadership courses, started attending professional workshops, reconnected with interests she had abandoned years earlier. The changes were subtle at first. Richard barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on expanding the company. Monica hoped he would eventually ask questions, show curiosity, encourage her growth the way she had always encouraged his. Instead, the distance continued widening. Then came the conversation she would never forget. It happened late one evening after Richard returned home from another business trip. Monica calmly explained how disconnected she felt. She spoke honestly about loneliness, disappointment, and the feeling that their marriage no longer existed beyond appearances. Richard listened quietly before responding. His words were not cruel. In some ways, they were worse. He told her she was overthinking things. He reminded her of everything they had built. He insisted that once the company reached its next milestone, life would become easier. Monica looked at him across the room and realized something heartbreaking. He truly did not understand. The success he worked so hard to protect was slowly costing him the relationship that once mattered most. That night, after Richard fell asleep, Monica sat alone beside a window overlooking the city lights. For hours, she stared into the darkness thinking about the woman she used to be and the life she wanted moving forward. Somewhere deep inside, a difficult truth was beginning to form. Love could survive many challenges, but it could not survive forever when only one person was fighting to keep it alive. And for the first time, Monica began wondering what her future might look like if she stopped waiting for Richard to come back to her. The decision to leave did not happen during a dramatic argument. There was no shattered trust, no public scandal, no moment that could easily be blamed for the end of the marriage. Instead, it arrived after years of accumulated disappointment. Hundreds of small moments. Hundreds of silent realizations. Monica reached a point where she could no longer ignore the truth. She was married to a man she still loved, but she no longer felt seen by him. In the weeks following their difficult conversation, she paid close attention to their daily life. Nothing changed. Richard remained consumed by meetings, negotiations, and expansion plans. He still kissed her goodbye in the morning, still asked polite questions about her day. Yet everything felt mechanical, predictable, distant. It was as if they had become business partners sharing a house rather than two people building a life together. One evening, Monica found an old photo album while organizing a storage closet. She carried it into the living room and slowly turned the pages. There they were, two young people smiling beneath sunlight during their honeymoon, celebrating small victories, laughing at things neither could remember anymore. The photographs captured a version of their relationship that felt increasingly unfamiliar. Monica touched one picture gently. She did not miss the money they lacked back then. She missed the connection, the presence, the feeling that they were facing life together. When Richard returned home that night, she showed him the album. For a moment, she hoped it might spark something. A memory, a conversation, a recognition of how much had changed. Richard smiled briefly and flipped through a few pages. Then his phone rang. An investor needed immediate attention. Within minutes, he was back inside his office discussing business. Monica remained alone on the couch holding the photographs. Something inside her became very quiet. Not angry, not emotional, simply certain. Several days later, she scheduled a meeting with an attorney. The decision felt surreal. She almost canceled twice. Yet every question the attorney asked forced her to confront realities she had avoided for years. Was she happy? Did she believe things would improve? Did she feel valued in the relationship? The answers came more easily than she expected. When she left the office that afternoon, she sat in her car for nearly an hour. Tears filled her eyes, but they were not tears of confusion. They were tears of acceptance. The hardest part was no longer deciding what to do. The hardest part was admitting that she had already waited as long as she could. A week later, Monica asked Richard to join her for dinner at home. He arrived slightly late, distracted by messages appearing on his phone. At first, the conversation seemed ordinary. Then she placed an envelope on the table between them. Richard looked at it curiously. When he opened it and saw the divorce papers, the room fell silent. For several seconds, he simply stared. "Monica," he said quietly, "what is this?" She met his eyes calmly. "It is me accepting something I should have accepted a long time ago." Richard looked genuinely shocked. He insisted they could work things out. Promised to make more time. Promised to slow down. Promised to change. Monica listened carefully because she knew he meant every word. The problem was that she had heard similar promises before. Not once. Many times. "I do not doubt your intentions," she told him softly. "I doubt your priorities." The honesty of her words struck harder than any accusation could have. For the first time, Richard seemed to understand the depth of what was happening. Yet even then, part of him believed the situation could still be fixed later. After the next project. After the next quarter. After things settled down. Monica knew better. Some opportunities disappear quietly while people are busy making future plans. The divorce was finalized several months later. There were no public conflicts. No ugly disputes. Monica left with dignity and grace. As she walked out of the courthouse into the cool Chicago afternoon, she felt sadness. But beneath that sadness existed something else. Freedom. For the first time in years, her future belonged entirely to her. What neither of them understood that day was how differently the next 3 years would unfold. The first few months after the divorce felt strangely quiet. For years, Monica's life had revolved around supporting a marriage, maintaining a household, and adapting to Richard's demanding schedule. Suddenly, the routines that once defined her days disappeared. She moved into a modest apartment overlooking a small park on the north side of Chicago. The space was far smaller than the luxury home she had left behind, but for the first time in a long while, it felt entirely her own. At first, the silence was uncomfortable. There were evenings when she sat alone by the window watching city lights flicker against the skyline, wondering whether she had made the right decision. Healing was not immediate. Freedom and sadness often arrived together. Some mornings, she woke feeling optimistic. Other days, she questioned everything. Yet through every difficult moment, one truth remained clear. She no longer felt invisible. For the first time in years, she had room to hear her own thoughts. Instead of focusing on what she had lost, Monica gradually began focusing on what she could build. She enrolled in a leadership development program she had once postponed because of family obligations. She attended networking events. She volunteered with organizations supporting women returning to the workforce after major life transitions. Every new experience expanded her confidence. Every challenge reminded her that she was more capable than she had allowed herself to believe. During one workshop, a guest speaker discussed entrepreneurship and community impact. The presentation sparked something inside Monica. For years, she had observed how businesses operated. She understood communication, organization, relationship management, and strategic planning better than she realized. More importantly, she possessed a deep understanding of people. While others focused solely on profits, Monica recognized the value of connection. That insight became the foundation of a new idea. Several months later, she launched a consulting company specializing in leadership development and community engagement programs. The beginning was far from glamorous. She worked long hours from a small office. She handled everything herself: marketing, scheduling, client meetings, administrative tasks. There were setbacks and disappointments. Some proposals were rejected. Some opportunities disappeared unexpectedly. Yet unlike the loneliness she experienced during her marriage, these challenges carried a different feeling. Every obstacle belonged to a future she was creating for herself. Gradually, the business began gaining momentum. One client led to another. Referrals increased. Organizations appreciated Monica's ability to combine practical strategy with genuine human understanding. Her reputation spread beyond Chicago. Invitations arrived from nonprofit groups, universities, and professional associations seeking guidance on leadership and organizational culture. As her business grew, so did her confidence. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. Monica no longer entered rooms hoping to be accepted. She entered rooms knowing she belonged. Friends who had not seen her in years noticed the difference immediately. She smiled more often, spoke more confidently, carried herself with a quiet strength that seemed effortless. Yet perhaps the most remarkable part of her success was that it never changed her character. She remained generous, thoughtful, compassionate. The same qualities Richard once loved had only become stronger. Meanwhile, Richard's life moved in a very different direction. His company continued expanding. Awards accumulated. Financial success reached levels he once considered impossible. From the outside, everything appeared perfect. Yet there were moments when certain memories surfaced unexpectedly. Passing a restaurant where he and Monica once celebrated anniversaries. Finding an old photograph tucked inside a desk drawer. Hearing a song that reminded him of happier years. He pushed those thoughts aside whenever they appeared. Work remained his preferred distraction. What Richard did not realize was that while he was busy protecting his success, Monica was becoming the person she had always been capable of becoming. One autumn afternoon, nearly 3 years after the divorce, Monica stood on stage before hundreds of attendees at a national leadership conference in New York City. As she delivered the keynote address, the audience listened attentively. Her message focused on resilience, self-worth, and the courage required to begin again. When the presentation ended, the standing ovation lasted several minutes. Monica smiled warmly as applause filled the room. She had built a life she was proud of, a life defined not by loss, but by growth. And somewhere hundreds of miles away, Richard Lawson remained completely unaware that the woman he once underestimated was quietly becoming extraordinary. The celebration at the Lawson Grand Hotel had already been declared a triumph long before Monica arrived. News outlets covered the event. Industry leaders filled the ballroom. Investors from across the country gathered beneath crystal chandeliers to honor another record-breaking year for Lawson Development. Every detail reflected success. Every speech praised achievement. Every conversation revolved around growth, influence, and future opportunities. Richard should have been enjoying every moment. Instead, his attention remained fixed on a single person standing across the room. 3 years earlier, he watched Monica leave a courthouse carrying nothing except a small handbag and a quiet sense of dignity. Tonight, she moved through the ballroom like someone entirely at peace with herself. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Guests approached her constantly. Some wanted introductions. Others wanted business advice. Several recognized her from leadership conferences and community initiatives that had gained national attention. Everywhere she went, respect seemed to follow. Richard stood silently observing conversations he never expected to witness. One investor he had spent months trying to impress was now speaking enthusiastically with Monica near the center of the ballroom. A university president invited her to participate in an upcoming advisory board. A well-known philanthropist asked about collaborating on future projects. None of these interactions appeared forced. People genuinely valued her perspective. Richard felt something unfamiliar. Not envy. Regret. Deep, unmistakable regret. He remembered the countless times Monica shared ideas during their marriage. Ideas he politely dismissed because he was too busy focusing on his own ambitions. He remembered conversations interrupted by phone calls, dreams postponed indefinitely, moments that seemed insignificant at the time. Across the room, Monica laughed warmly at something a guest said. The sound carried unexpectedly through the crowd. Richard had not heard that laugh in years. For a brief moment, memories surfaced with uncomfortable clarity. Weekend breakfasts before success complicated everything. Long walks through city parks. Late-night conversations about the future. The woman standing before him was still Monica. Yet she had become more confident, more accomplished, and somehow even more herself than before. As the evening continued, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage to announce special recognitions. Several awards honored business achievements and community impact. Then a surprise announcement appeared on the giant screens surrounding the ballroom. The room applauded as Monica's name appeared alongside photographs from various leadership initiatives and charitable programs she had helped develop. The audience rose to its feet. Richard froze. He had not known she would be receiving an award. Monica approached the stage with calm elegance. Her acceptance speech lasted only a few minutes, but every word commanded attention. She spoke about resilience, growth, and the importance of believing in possibilities even when circumstances suggest otherwise. She thanked mentors, colleagues, and community partners. She spoke with humility despite everything she had achieved. When the speech ended, the standing ovation seemed endless. Richard joined the applause, but his heart felt heavier with every passing second. Because while the audience celebrated Monica's accomplishments, he found himself confronting a painful truth. He had spent years believing success was measured by what a person gained: wealth, status, recognition. Yet standing in that ballroom, he finally understood another measure existed. What had he lost while chasing everything else? After the ceremony, several guests approached Richard to discuss Monica. They praised her intelligence, her leadership, her character. Each compliment felt like another reminder of something he once took for granted. Later, as the orchestra played softly in the background and city lights shimmered beyond the glass walls, Richard found himself staring at an old photograph displayed in a company anniversary slideshow. The image had been taken years earlier at a charity fundraiser. Monica stood beside him, smiling proudly while he accepted an award. At the time, he barely noticed her presence in the picture. Tonight, she was the only person he could see. And for the first time since the divorce, Richard Lawson stopped wondering whether losing Monica had been a mistake. He began wondering if it was the greatest mistake of his entire life. Long after the applause faded and guests returned to their conversations, Richard remained standing near the edge of the ballroom. The celebration continued around him exactly as planned. Investors exchanged business cards. Reporters conducted interviews. Music drifted through the air. Yet for Richard, the evening had become something entirely different. It was no longer a celebration of corporate success. It had become a mirror reflecting choices he could no longer avoid examining. Across the room, Monica spoke with a group of community leaders discussing future initiatives. She looked comfortable, confident, and completely at ease. Watching her now, Richard realized how often he had underestimated the depth of her abilities. During their marriage, he always viewed himself as the ambitious one, the visionary, the builder. Monica had supported him so consistently that he rarely stopped to consider the strength required to stand beside someone chasing enormous goals. He had mistaken her quiet nature for limitation. Tonight, he understood how wrong he had been. One conversation after another reinforced the same lesson. A university president described the impact of Monica's mentorship programs. A nonprofit director praised her leadership during a major community project. An executive from New York spoke about her keynote address at a national conference. Everywhere Richard turned, people admired qualities he once took for granted. Not because Monica demanded attention, because she earned respect naturally. As the evening progressed, he found himself revisiting memories he had ignored for years. He remembered nights when Monica waited for him to come home. Vacations postponed indefinitely. Important conversations interrupted by work calls. He remembered every time she tried to reconnect, and every time he convinced himself there would be another opportunity later. The painful truth was becoming impossible to escape. Monica did not leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she grew tired of competing with priorities that always seemed more important. Near midnight, Richard stepped onto a balcony overlooking Chicago's skyline. The cold air offered temporary relief from the emotions building inside him. Thousands of lights stretched across the city below. Years earlier, standing beside Monica, he would have admired the view and talked about future dreams. Tonight, the city felt strangely quiet. He thought about everything he had gained since the divorce. The company expanded. His wealth increased. His reputation grew stronger than ever. By every traditional measure, he had won. Yet the feeling of victory seemed hollow. For the first time, Richard questioned whether success without meaningful connection was truly success at all. A few minutes later, he noticed Monica stepping onto a nearby section of the balcony. She stood alone, looking toward the skyline. Neither spoke immediately. The silence between them felt different than the silence that once filled their marriage. This silence carried understanding rather than distance. Richard watched her for a moment before finally speaking. Congratulations on the award. Monica turned and offered a warm smile. Thank you. The simplicity of the exchange somehow made everything harder. There was no resentment in her voice. No bitterness. No attempt to make him feel guilty. She had moved beyond all of that. Richard realized that while he spent years avoiding regret, Monica spent those same years building a life she genuinely loved. They spoke briefly about the event, mutual acquaintances, and several community initiatives. The conversation remained comfortable yet careful. When it ended, Monica excused herself to rejoin other guests. Richard remained alone, on the balcony, watching her disappear into the crowd. At that moment, the realization became undeniable. The greatest loss of his life was not a failed business deal or a missed opportunity. It was failing to recognize the value of the person who stood beside him when success was still only a dream. And for the first time, Richard Lawson understood that some mistakes do not reveal their true cost until years after they are made. The days following the gala passed more slowly than Richard expected. For years, his schedule had been capable of distracting him from almost anything. Meetings filled mornings. Negotiations occupied afternoons. Business dinners consumed evenings. Yet no amount of activity seemed capable of quieting the thoughts that followed him after seeing Monica again. Her presence at the event had reopened memories he spent years keeping buried beneath accomplishments and obligations. What unsettled him most was not her success. It was the realization that she had achieved it without him. Somewhere along the way, he had convinced himself that Monica needed him more than he needed her. The gala destroyed that illusion completely. 1 week later, Richard found himself attending a community leadership summit hosted in downtown Chicago. Lawson Development was one of the event sponsors, and his appearance had been scheduled months earlier. When he arrived, he expected another routine engagement. Instead, he discovered that Monica would be delivering the closing keynote address. The news caught him off guard. Part of him considered leaving immediately. Another part knew he needed to stay. Throughout the day, he listened as speakers discussed innovation, education, and community growth. Yet his attention kept drifting toward the program schedule. When Monica finally stepped onto the stage that afternoon, the room grew quiet. Hundreds of attendees focused on her. Richard remained seated near the back, observing carefully. Monica spoke about resilience, about rebuilding after disappointment, about the danger of allowing circumstances to define personal worth. She never mentioned their marriage, never referenced the divorce. Yet somehow every word felt personal. She described how growth often begins when people stop waiting for external validation and start trusting themselves. She spoke about courage, not as something dramatic, but as the decision to move forward one day at a time. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause. Richard understood why. Monica had developed a gift for making people feel understood, a gift he remembered seeing years ago, long before anyone else noticed it. After the presentation ended, attendees gathered in the networking hall. Richard considered approaching her several times before finally doing so. Monica stood near a display table speaking with several guests. When she noticed him approaching, her expression remained warm and composed. "Your speech was impressive," Richard said sincerely. Monica smiled. "Thank you. That means a lot." For a moment, neither knew what to say next. Then Richard took a slow breath. "There is something I should have said a long time ago." Monica listened quietly. "I spent years believing success would solve everything," he continued. "I kept thinking there would always be more time, more opportunities, more chances to fix what I was neglecting. I was wrong." The honesty surprised even him. Monica remained silent for several seconds before responding. "I know you believed you were doing the right thing." Richard nodded. "That does not make the outcome any less painful." Monica looked at him thoughtfully. There was no anger in her eyes, no resentment, only understanding. "Pain teaches lessons success often cannot," she said gently. The words lingered between them. Richard realized she was not speaking only about him. She was speaking about herself as well. Everything she had become emerged from challenges she never wanted, but ultimately learned from. Their conversation lasted only a few minutes before other attendees approached Monica. As she excused herself politely, Richard watched her walk away once again. This time, however, the feeling was different. The regret remained, but something else had joined it. Acceptance. For the first time, he understood that apologizing could acknowledge the past, but it could not rewrite it. And as Monica, disappeared into a crowd of people inspired by her story. Richard finally accepted a truth he had resisted for years. Some of life's most important lessons arrive only after the opportunity to change the outcome has already passed. Several months passed after the leadership summit, and life continued moving forward for both Monica and Richard. The seasons changed across Chicago. Spring gradually softened into summer, bringing longer days and warmer evenings. For Monica, the months were filled with meaningful work. Her consulting company expanded into multiple cities. Community initiatives flourished. Invitations to speak at conferences arrived more frequently than she could accept. Yet despite her growing success, the greatest difference in her life had nothing to do with business achievements. It was the peace she carried within herself. She no longer measured her worth through someone else's attention. She no longer questioned whether she deserved happiness. She had built a life rooted in purpose, confidence, and self-respect. One Saturday afternoon, Monica attended the opening ceremony for a new youth leadership center funded through partnerships she helped organize. Families filled the courtyard. Volunteers welcomed guests. Students toured classrooms designed to support future generations of entrepreneurs and community leaders. As Monica moved through the crowd greeting visitors, she noticed something familiar. Richard stood near the entrance speaking with several local officials. Their eyes met briefly across the courtyard. This time, neither felt surprise. Life had brought them to the same place through very different paths. Later, after the ceremony concluded, they found themselves walking through a garden behind the center. Children laughed nearby, while families gathered beneath the shade of large trees. The atmosphere felt calm and genuine. For several minutes, they simply talked. Not about the divorce. Not about regrets. Not about missed opportunities. They discussed community programs, leadership initiatives, and future projects. The conversation flowed naturally. Eventually, Richard paused and looked around the center Monica had helped create. "You built something remarkable," he said quietly. Monica smiled. "A lot of people helped make it possible." Richard nodded. "That sounds like something you would say." They shared a brief laugh. Then Richard became thoughtful. "For a long time, I kept thinking about what I lost," he admitted. "But recently I started realizing something else. The real lesson was not about losing someone. It was about failing to appreciate them while I had the chance." Monica listened without interrupting. There was wisdom in his words now, a humility that had not existed years earlier. Success had once convinced Richard that time was unlimited. Experience taught him otherwise. "We both learned things," Monica replied gently. "Sometimes difficult chapters teach lessons easy seasons never could." Richard smiled. "That sounds exactly like something from one of your speeches." Monica laughed softly. "Maybe because it is true." As the afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees, neither felt the need to revisit old pain. Some stories do not require dramatic reunions or fairy tale endings. Sometimes growth itself becomes the resolution. Richard had learned that achievements mean little when relationships are neglected. Monica had learned that self-worth cannot depend on another person's recognition. Both carried those lessons forward. Before leaving, they stopped near the entrance of the center where volunteers continued greeting guests. Richard extended his hand. Monica looked at it for a moment before accepting it warmly. The gesture felt symbolic in a way neither needed to explain. Not a beginning. Not a return to the past. Simply respect between two people who had shared an important chapter of life. As Monica walked toward a group of students waiting to speak with her, Richard remained standing near the courtyard. He watched her for a moment and smiled. The regret would always exist. Some mistakes leave permanent marks. But for the first time, it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a lesson. And as the afternoon sun painted the city in shades of gold, Richard finally understood that success is not measured by how much a person accumulates. It is measured by how well they value what truly matters. Meanwhile, Monica continued walking forward with confidence and grace, not because someone finally recognized her worth, but because she had learned to recognize it herself. And in the end, that became the greatest victory of all.